Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're basically cracking open a masterclass in Personal Finance 101. We're going to unpack the literal math that separates the people who drown in debt from the people who use it to build massive wealth. We'll look at how the ultra-wealthy leverage capital, but more importantly, how you can start applying these exact same strategies to your own life today. To kick things off, we really need to completely shift our mindset. Because, here's a pretty wild reality. Two people can take out the exact same loan, right? Same amount, same interest rate, same day. But one ends up buried and the other ends up richer than when they started. The debt itself isn't actually the problem. Using it like you're poor is the problem. It's literally all about how you use it. So here's our syllabus for today. First, we'll cover why debt is just rented money. Then, we'll dive into the spread and leverage, and finally, we'll jump into a 3-step lab covering how to lower your rent, the 0% arbitrage, and trading credit flow. Let's get right into it. Section 1. Debt is rented money. Let's dive into this first concept and fundamentally redefine what a loan actually is. Seriously, just forget everything you've ever been told about debt for a second. At its absolute core, a loan is really nothing more complicated than renting money. You borrow a lump sum, you hold on to it for a while, and then you give it back. And the interest rate? Well, that's simply the fee you're paying for the privilege. It's just your rent. Simple as that. And this right here, this contrast in mindset, is exactly what separates the rich from the poor. A poor mindset looks at a loan with total fear, basically asking, oh man, how do I pay this back as fast as humanly possible? But a wealthy mindset, they look at the exact same loan as a massive lever, asking, okay, what's the spread, and how many dollars can I actually control with this? Section 2. The spread and leverage. Now that we've established we're really just renting money, we need to look at the engine behind all wealth creation. And that engine is called the spread. The only question that genuinely matters when you rent money is this. When you put that money to work, does it earn more than the rent costs? Think about it. If the money you borrowed earns, say, 7% out in the market, then your rent on that money only costs you 4%, well, you just kept that 3% difference. You just earned a 3% return on money that was literally never even yours to begin with. That gap right there, that's the spread. And honestly, it is the entire game. Let's actually run the numbers on how billionaires use the spread. They use a strategy called buy, borrow, die. It sounds intense, but here's how it works. Wealthy individuals own assets growing at, let's say, 7%. Instead of selling those assets, which would trigger a massive 24% capital gains tax, they just go to a bank and borrow against their assets at around 6%. The spread is still positive, so they get the cash to fund their lavish lifestyles, their assets just keep on growing, and they completely 100% legally avoid handing over a quarter of their wealth to the government. They are literally renting money at 6% to dodge a tax to 24%. It's absolutely brilliant. But hey, before we start applying these super powerful mechanisms to your own wallet, we have to hit the brakes for a second and look at the dark side of leverage. We really have to ask, what happens if your assets actually drop in value? Because leverage multiplies everything. A positive spread multiplies into a fortune, sure, but a negative spread, that multiplies into a total unmitigated disaster. If the market drops and the collateral you borrowed against loses value, the lender's going to demand more cash immediately. If you don't have it, they force the sale of your assets. That's what we call a margin call. And if you're doing something insanely risky, like short selling, which is basically borrowing in reverse to bet against a stock, your losses can actually climb with literally no limit. You can trigger an infinite negative spread. I'm not showing you this to scare you, but you absolutely have to recognize where the guardrails are. Section 3. Step 1. Lower your rent. Okay, let's step away from billionaire tax strategies and crazy leveraged stock portfolios. Let's move into our step-by-step personal finance lab and see how you can safely apply these exact mechanisms to your own life, starting today. Here is your super practical 3-step guide to completely flipping the script on your own debt, and we're going to start with the absolute fastest, most accessible win. Step 1 is lowering your rent. Look, most people obsess over how to make their money earn more, right? But the wealthy, they obsess over making their money cost less. Your credit score is the single biggest lever determining what your rented money costs you. And right now, the national average credit score is sitting at about 715. So the absolutely crucial takeaway here is that unlike trying to perfectly time the stock market, improving your credit score is almost entirely within your own control. Every single point you raise your score directly lowers the interest rate, the rent, on things like a mortgage, a car loan, or a business line of credit. And every point you knock off that cost goes straight into your spread. Over a lifetime, that literally compounds into tens, even hundreds of thousands of dollars. The rich don't have some secret magical bank. They've just made themselves incredibly cheap to lend to. Section 4. Step 2. The 0% arbitrage. What's really fascinating about this next step is how it mirrors the exact strategies of the ultra-rich, just scaled down to something you can run right now from your own laptop. Okay, if you're currently carrying a credit card balance, you are on the wildly wrong side of the spread. At an average rate of 24%, you are essentially acting as the factory lending out money to the credit card company at an absolutely astronomical cost to yourself. No way around it, that's a bad spot to be in. But you can instantly flip the script. You can move that toxic high-interest debt over to an introductory balance transfer card that offers 0% interest for 18 to 24 months. Usually, to do this, it just costs a tiny one-time upfront transfer fee of around 3% to 5%. Let's actually run the math on this arbitrage. If you stay on the old card, you just bleed out 24% a year, but if you transfer it, you pay a one-time 3% fee to rent that money for nearly 2 entire years. You are literally erasing a 24% compounding cost for a flat 3% fee. Guys, that isn't just saving money. Mathematically speaking, that is a guaranteed positive return that almost no stock market investment on the planet could ever match. This is the exact same mechanism as the wealthy borrowing cheap so they can keep the difference. Section 5. Step 3. Trade credit float. This final step takes everything we've talked about and applies the absolute oldest business trick in the book directly to you. So imagine you want to start a business selling pens. The poor way to do this is to use your own hard-earned cash to buy a whole container of pens, completely tying up your money for months. The wealthy way, that's using trade credit. Manufacturers will actually give you the product on terms, meaning you get the pens right now and you don't pay for them for 30, 60, or even 90 days. They're acting as your bank. In this scenario, the product itself is the loan. Now, if you manage to sell those pens and collect the cash from your customers before your bill to the factory is even due, think about it. How much of your own cash was actually in this deal? Absolutely zero. None. You controlled an entire container of inventory with 100% rented terms, and because you are dividing your profit by zero of your own dollars, your return on your own cash is mathematically infinite. It's mind-blowing. And the best part? You don't even need an overseas factory to run this play today. If you're a freelancer, say taking an upfront customer deposit to fund the materials for a job before you spend a single dime of your own, you're doing this. If you're floating inventory on a 0% introductory credit card, you're doing this. You are applying the exact same math the wealthy use to control massive assets with zero of your own dollars. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to remember this one thing. Debt is just rented money. The size of the loan doesn't actually matter. The only question that has ever mattered is whether what you do with it earns more than the rent. Well, you know the math now. You know exactly how to check your credit, flip your high-interest balances, and use trade float. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought to ponder. Will you let debt be the thing that owns you, or will you run the numbers, calculate the spread, and finally make it the thing you own?